Christianity and Islam are the two largest worldviews on the planet. We host real, honest conversations about the world's most important issues.
Will you distance yourself from those who think differently, or will you join us at the table and talk about what is really important? This is the Al-Maida Initiative, conversation without compromise.
So the interesting, the thing is, right, is like reading this book, I feel like if you're a person who is taking over a large chain of supermarkets with the different franchises, which are all kind of like draining money, and you need to make the business profitable, this would be an excellent book to turn this around, right?
Absolutely.
Phenomenal book.
Absolutely, right.
But if you're somebody in the woods who's being attacked by a pack of wolves,
Right.
this doesn't help.
It's not even big enough to throw at them, right? Like it's Wait, sit down, wolves. Let's talk about this.
Yeah. Like so it's like, and actually that's part of the problem, right? So once we get to page 121, it says here, the public cannot be mobilized in the way that Dewey envisaged unless it has a clear moral purpose.
Right.
But it doesn't have any, like, it doesn't, yeah, of course, but how, why, what? Like, what is the moral purpose, right? The Taliban have a clear moral purpose.
Right.
Like, so the problem is with this kind of book is that it just kind of assumes this baseline of morality that everyone basically agrees on, right? It's this sort of generic global secularism, which can't justify its own existence. So somebody from the Taliban could read this book and build a more efficient Taliban-based system.
Sure. Right.
Because they,
right.
again, there's basically there's like a blank space for whatever morality you want to put in here.
Sure.
Because it's being assumed rather than justified, right?
Right.
So the assumption is popular participation is a good thing. A nation state is a good thing.
Right.
A universal education is a good thing. The equality of men and women is a good thing, without ever actually justifying those things, right?
Right.
Whereas if you meet someone from the Taliban, they're going to say, well, no, a state is not, a nation state is not a good thing because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not operate a nation state.
Right.
He left the world a caliphate, which had porous borders, which expanded to include everybody living under Islam.
Right.
Not to say every Muslim's going to believe in that, but that's how the Taliban's going to justify,
Sure,
what they believe. So it's not to say there's no arguments anywhere against what the Taliban have to say, but this book certainly isn't making any of those.
Yeah. I mean, you make a really good point. I think it just doesn't have the scope of vision that actually reflected what's happened in the region since 1900, right? Like, okay, we've always had corruption for like 100 years, let's just go back 100 years, right? For the last 100 years, it's been very corrupt and autocratic, all the way under Zahir Shah. And then, there's a revolution in the 70s, right? And then there's a communist revolution in 78. And then there's the Russians, and they come in, in the 80s. And then that all falls apart. And then the Taliban come in. I mean, you look at it, it's always been corrupt. There's always been conflict. There's never been freedom, right? Never been true personal freedom. Maybe for a couple of years here and there, but not a long-term culture of it. And expecting people to just kind of buy in because, okay, the Americans are here, right? There are tanks here now, and it's not happening right now this minute. And it doesn't really address that, right? Like, how do you rally people to your cause who have been oppressed for so long, right? And have nothing, if you ask me, but cynicism towards this idea of outside interventions, the farmer who has his farm, who is finally turning a buck because he's selling, like poppy so that they can make heroin, and other opiates. How do you convince him that this is part of your growth, right? This benefits you. You being a part of this system is what's going to change things, and you won't have to sell this poppy because you'll make 10 times more money selling, fruits and nuts and getting them exported and all this other stuff. And I'm sure that, it just kind of rings hollow, right? Like, okay, I've heard this before. Or you're telling me this, but I know that when you leave, these guys will come back and they'll force me to grow the poppies again. Or the only way that I can survive is by growing the poppies. And it's really, like that, this book, it centers on optimism, but it doesn't draw the past of that particular area, right? Like, I know he's talking about it more globally, and it's more like, how do we fix all the states in the world that are going through this? But those states have had similar things too. The Vietnamese had the Khmer Rouge, like, the Tamil Tigers. There's just all these groups that are like so focused on their ideologies, and they know what a win is for them. But you're coming in here and you're saying, well, democracy, political progress, political rights, and involvement in the process, and all these other things. Like, these are so great. And the guy's going, okay, but I really just want to survive.
Yeah.
And how are you going to tell me that this stuff is going to help me survive? How is it better than what I was doing before? And then on top of that, the cynicism in which I know you're going to leave.
Yeah.
I know it's not going to work. So why would I put all this effort into it?
Right.
Yeah.
Which, self-fulfilling prophecy or not, was justified in the end.
I mean, it was so hard to watch, bro. I mean, it was just like, this is everything my father worked for, everything my father hoped for, right? Like, the Soviets leaving, and then the Taliban leaving, and we all hoped for that. We all hoped that the Taliban would never ever come back. That they would be defeated. Turns out they were just chilling in their living rooms, like waiting, for us to leave. And they had a plan. It looked like they were very quickly able to mobilize. They were able to mobilize faster than the government was. They had a better scope of what was going on the ground. And, it does not appear that his academic-minded principles were able to clearly grasp the idea of, like, that evil I was talking about, right? This idea that, we're going to look at it from the Bible, right? Like, the heart is desperately wicked, and who can know it? It says, they say follow your heart, but your heart is corrupt. It will like lead you in the wrong way. And not to get into the motives of, your average Talibani, but I'm sure he thinks that he's doing the right thing.
Right.
He thinks that he's doing the right, like, he's justified in taking life to stamp out evil. But the problem is there's a moral, like, blindness that occurs when you're that steeped in the idea of, well, I will kill somebody to get them to, to get others to accept my point of view, right? Like, you don't see the tyranny in that. You don't see the oppressiveness in that. You think that you're doing them a favor.
Right.
And it's mind boggling, right? That, like, you're this learned person who has the ear of all of these, like, really influential world systems, and the part you're focused on, probably rightfully, is the corruption element of it and everything like that. But, and how their efforts play out on the ground in these countries, but to just not really have, like, an understanding of what's happening there, like, why these people think that way and why they respond that way, and that you're not just going to fix it by bringing them to a table and trying to build some kind of parliamentary system. They don't want that. Why would you share power when you could have it all?
Right. Well,
right.
So, and I think the central issue with this book is the central issue with secularism itself, in that it's Christless Christianity.
Right.
That's what he's preaching in this
book.
book.
That's actually really good.
So what is that, right? You've kind of got this optimistic worldwide kingdom that blesses the world.
Right.
But what you don't have is you're not prepared for crucifixion, right? You're not prepared to suffer,
Right.
right? You're showing a kingdom of the Messiah without the crucifixion, without the resurrection, therefore, and without a present Jesus in heaven, ruling over all things.
Right.
So part of the reason we're able to sort of overthrow sort of Catholic hegemony in Europe is because there are people who are committed enough to truth that they were willing to die for it.
Right.
So the education came about in England because people started translating the Bible into English, and they started teaching the common people.
Sure.
And the Catholic Church at the time actively wanted to stop that. And there were two guys called Thomas Ridley and Hugh Latimer, who were burned at the stake for educating people in the Bible and being part of this movement.
Yep.
And as they're tying them up at the stake, they say, he says, "Take courage, Brother Ridley, because today we're going to set such a fire in England that by God's grace will never be put out."
Right.
So, so secularism wants to take some of the morals of New Testament Christianity, like servant leadership, right? The decentralization of power, equality, the education of everybody, right? All of those are New Testament and Old Testament principles, right? All of those are in the Bible, but it doesn't have any promises connected to that. It just has vague hope, right? So the secular promise to the Afghan living in Afghanistan is like, hey, you can have a world full of education and equality and hope and future and prosperity. Okay, what are you prepared to do for that? Oh, we'll do our best.
Right.
What about the Taliban? Oh, okay, well, hopefully they won't come back. Whereas if you have biblical Christianity in that setting, then the promise is, look, you are okay with God. You are loved by God, and you are in his hands. And your obligation is to do the right thing and follow Jesus. And that may mean picking up your cross and following him. And you stand up to people like the Taliban. And you stand up to corruption, even if it costs you your job, even if it costs you your livelihood, even if it costs you your life, because you know that God has your back.
Right.
And you've got fundamentally nothing to fear.
Right.